It's jernigan here. I don't know if you guys ever have this thingy on here. It says Aaron Owen's reviewers are also watching. I don't know if it's pretty good that is, you know. People recommend your channel and say my reviewers are also watching. If you guys can see at the top there, that's a Tony Robinson video in Stafford yesterday. I'm not going to play that one yet, but this is the video. I don't know what video that is, and she resigned as well. So we're going for a long, crazy day, guys, with people resigning from the jobs of the Parliament. So I'm gonna. Which video should we check out first? At least it says my reviews are also watching. It's pretty good. I don't know if you guys have the same thing. There's one underneath, Discovery Channel scene. It's like it recommends your channel. I mean, sorry about that. I've got a sore throat. I'm going to click onto the Tony Robinson video and watch that as well. This is Tony Robinson yesterday while he was in Staffordshire. I don't know. Sorry about that coughing, guys. I had a very sore throat. So it's been a crazy week, I think, for most people.
The 22nd of May. It's my son's birthday today. I'll start off on that one. It's my son's birthday. Happy birthday, baby. I love you. The 22nd of May is a date that everyone should remember. Lee Rigby was beheaded 6 years ago today. I remember in the weeks afterwards, David Cameron set up a government task force to combat and stop Islamic extremism. He had a 5-year plan. What's happened over those 5 years? 2,000 Muslims have gone out to fight for ISIS. We've seen multiple terrorist attacks. Terrorism arrests go up 60% every year. He's failed. Our government has failed. 2 years ago today, what happened in the beautiful city of Manchester? We witnessed our children attacked. Children from these cities were blown to pieces. People talk about those that died. We talk about the people who died on 7/7. 700 people lost their limbs on 7/7. Even the people who didn't die, their lives were changed forever in attacks against our country. So we'll just start off with a minute's silence, remembering all the victims. During the minute's silence,
This is my LAN cable is not connected again. You're getting that error. Can't connect to the service of the application to the internet again, apparently. No longer due to network error.
Over here is standing with us. The Jews don't stand with Labour anymore. You're anti-Semitic. It's you that's anti-Semitic. I'm proud. They're shouting never again. The Star of David flies in our crowd. There's no Star of David flying in yours. We are the proud. I proudly stand with Israel. When we win tomorrow, with your help, we send a message to working class people across this country that we can do it, that it's on, that the time is now, that this is our moment. Let the 23rd of May be remembered as the date it started. Let the British public know it started in the Northwest, and let them know that Salford was involved. It's happening. It's happening. It's in our DNA. It's who we are. We need to wake up as people and realise who we are. Remember our history. Remember who we are.
Remember it all British.
Here, I know you're risking something being here. I know you've come out, you've made a commitment. There's one lad who's here today. There's one lad, and this is a perfect example of it. I'm going to ask him to come up, because my mum sends me videos, and she absolutely loves this lad's videos. This lad has been following me, and his mum has been, he's had problems at home, problems at work, been threatened to be kicked out of his house if he comes to one of my demonstrations. I know there's so many of you out there who have social problems for supporting me. So Matthew, get up here, because this is for my mum anyway. Come up here. Coming up. Go. For too long, I have sat in fear in my own home, worried of what will happen to me if I decide to attend this man's rally. And I was constantly threatened by my sister and my mother that if I were to attend these rallies, I'd be kicked out, but I don't attend anymore. I feel like we're on the verge of something big. I feel, and I say that because I travel this country, and I can tell you, that is the minority, this is the majority, yeah? I'm telling you. A lady with a headscarf on. Africa in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum. I do not pay for you. We do not pay for you. Message tomorrow. Come on. Come on. Come on. It's about time the people in this country let them know how you're feeling. It's no good shouting at the TV. It's no good moaning in the pub. This is your moment. It's your moment to send every single one of them a message. Send the government a message. Send the media a message. Send them all a message. Tell them tomorrow you stand on the side of freedom, you stand on the side of truth, and you stand on the side of Tommy Robinson. Come on! Revolutions, man, revolutions. They're my favourite. Good night, Tommy. I'm very blind. My heroes can be seen. Oh, no.
This country needs to get back together in some kind of way. I don't know how we're going to do it, guys. I mean, the country's a mess, as we all know. Me sitting there explaining it and saying what it is and what it isn't, two different things. We just want our country back. We're British. We deserve our country. What all Theresa May has done and Jeremy Corbyn have done is nothing like that. Then you got Nigel Farage that tries to help us. Apparently he's there for all the people. But they say actions speak louder than words and stuff. We'll know eventually.
Go on. Thank you, babe. Thank you.
I love you so much. So proud of you. You're my boy.
Thanks.
And I'm so proud.
I hope I win this year. Oh, shit. Cheers, thanks.
Well, that's Tony Robinson. He's talking about winning the seat tomorrow, but I don't know if he will or he won't. But it's been a crazy week, as we all know. This is Brexit Party, OPA, hits by the milkshake outside. Another milkshake attack. But this is an old man this time. It's not Nigel Farage or Tony Robinson. This time with milkshake attack, it's an old guy. I mean, what's wrong with people these days? They just seem to do things to annoy people, and I wonder why people get angry. So this is the old guy here. It's got a milkshake attack.
Milkshake.
Who chucked it over then?
Who did it?
Who did it, yeah.
Oh, some of y'all, mid-20s.
Ridiculous. What kind of world we live in, hey?
Walked over to me, gave me the finger,
Yeah.
went up to the co-op, got a milkshake, came back in and threw it on me.
Fucking hell. Is that the problem? The MP had that done the other day, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's like people don't have any self-respect for anybody these days. They just want to do what they want to do. That's how it feels like to me and probably most other people. Ridiculous. And people say it's a safe world and a safe environment that we live in. Is it heck is like? That's how it feels. This is Anna Shrewsbury. She left
for the last 3 years, and I just couldn't, as leader of the Commons.
She's had enough of a job, this woman, and she's left the cabinet of Parliament.
Business questions tomorrow and announce a bill that I just think has elements I cannot support that aren't Brexit.
But you've held out for so long until
I have been determined to deliver Brexit, and I'm just worried that this bill with its new elements in it would not do that. It's been a really tough day.
Should the Prime Minister go now? Should the Prime Minister go?
Thanks very much.
Should the PM go? Andrea?
Well, goes to show. Let's have a look at the next one. Tony Robinson again.
Today is voting day. We need you. England needs you. Get out and vote. Your polling stations will be in.
As you guys know, it's voting day today for people.
They'll have polling station wrote outside on big signs.
Who's going to get in? Nigel Farage, Tony Robinson, Change UK, Greener, Labour, then Labour Democrats,
They'll give you a pencil to vote with. Bring your own pen.
UK Change, Change UK. I mean, Conservatives and Labour I think are going down as well, in my opinion. Lib Democrats.
Send a message to every single one of them. When you write
If you want to go for the island one, DUP.
Under Robinson Tommy. Not Tommy Robinson, but Robinson Tommy. At the very bottom. Put your mark on it, fold the paper in half. Don't write anything else on that paper. You write one of
They're
the
not respecting the referendum, in my opinion, and we've all been betrayed. But who knows if Tommy Robertson will win or Nigel Farage.
Are we getting out tomorrow and you voting? You, all those moments of feeling alone. You're not alone anymore. We'll prove that today. You'll prove that today. The results are on Sunday. You've got to get out and vote. We need you. Make sure you do it. Come on.
There's only one question you should be asking anyone in the building sites, in the CAFs, in the playground. One question. Have you voted for Tommy? Polling stations are open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's happening. Come on. I need every single one of you.
Follow all the to keep up with date the Tommy Robinson app store. Right. This was 1 day ago, Theresa May.
2 years since the Manchester Arena attack. It was a cowardly and sickening attack that deliberately targeted innocent and defenceless children. Members from across the House will
She's talking about the Manchester Arena attack where they got blown up by that Muslim years ago. It's a sickening attack.
And I'm sure members will also want to join me in paying tribute to the immense bravery and courage that the emergency services showed that night. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
John Woodcock. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will want to associate themselves with the words she has just spoken about the Manchester attack. Now, she may not have long left, and good luck with those meetings later today, but she can act now against the return of banned chemical weapons. British experts are this morning investigating a suspected chlorine attack by Al-Assad in Idlib. If it is proved, will she lead the international response against the return of this indiscriminate evil?
Well, Minister. The honourable gentleman is right to raise the issue of the evil of the use of chemical weapons. We, of course, acted in Syria with France and the United States when we saw chemical weapons being used in Syria. We, of course, suffered the use of chemical weapons here on the streets.
The thing in this world, guys, people just don't understand one another. This is why wars happen. This is why people start fights and kill people and stab people and rob people. And there's a lot of wickedness in this world. People that rape people, people that attack people for no reason because they don't understand one another. It's not right.
We consider Assad incapable of delivering a lasting peace, and his regime lost its legitimacy due to its atrocities against.
I just thought I'd mention it in this video.
People.
Antoinette Sandbat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that energy efficiency measures are critical in tackling climate change? Bringing
Talking about climate change again.
EPC-C standard could save 25% of electricity generation.
The environment and the planet of the
equivalent
Earth.
of 6 Hinkley Point nuclear power stations. It could save every family £270, and it could potentially pay for itself by generating £1.27 for every pound invested in it.
Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend has made an excellent point, and we, like her, absolutely recognise the importance of this issue. So the government
this
is
world
committed to
seems to me very lost.
Efficiency in 2.5 million homes by 2030. And our aim is to bring 2.5 million fuel-poor homes up to an energy performance certificate C rating by 2030. And as my honourable friend has said, this will indeed help to save energy and also bring down bills.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Bills always seem to be high in the UK. Always more
I joined the
expensive.
Prime Minister in commemorating all the victims of the Manchester bombing 2 years ago.
Jeremy Corbyn
Our
again.
thoughts are with the friends and the family of all those that were killed, the survivors, and of course the emergency service workers who gave such heroic service that night. They live with the horrors of this for the rest of their lives, and 10:31 tonight will be a very poignant moment for many people in Manchester. Mr. Speaker, I also want to pay tribute to the last survivor of the Hull headscarf revolutionaries, Yvonne Blenkinsop. She's visiting Parliament today. She led a campaign for basic safety on the UK's fishing fleets in the 1960s, and as a result, many lives were saved. I think people like her have made such an enormous contribution to our national life, they should be recognised for it. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to express on behalf of the Labour Party my outrage that the government has again failed our steel industry, putting 5,000 jobs at risk in British Steel, 20,000 more in the supply chain. This government has failed those people, and even at this late stage, and there is a statement later on today, must step in to save those jobs. Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister, why are schools having to close early on Friday afternoon due to spending cuts?
Prime Minister!
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman, because he has raised the issue of British Steel, and obviously we recognise that this is a worrying time for the thousands of dedicated British Steel workers and their families, but also those in the supply chain and local communities. We have indeed, the government has been working tirelessly with the company, with its owner, Greybull Capital, and lenders to explore all potential options to secure a solution for the company.
We're trying to get the country together, but how is it going to work?
Through the ETS agreement that we were willing to act, but we can only act within the law. And it is clear that it would be unlawful to provide a guarantee or loan on the terms requested by the company. We will be working with the company and others and the official receiver in the days and weeks ahead to ensure that we can pursue every step to secure the future of the operations at Scunthorpe, Skinning Grove and on Teesside. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has also agreed an indemnity for the official receiver to enable British Steel to continue to operate in the immediate future. There are no job losses at this time, and the official receiver has already said staff will continue to be paid and employed. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be updating the House in a statement later this afternoon. And on the issue of schools, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools.
Well, that would explain why 26 schools close early on a Friday every week, because they don't have enough money to keep themselves open. And, Mr. Speaker, there are more than 1,000 schools across England that are turning to crowdfunding websites with a wish list of things they want to raise money to buy. Really exotic things, like pencils, like glue, like textbooks. Why are they forced to do this if they allegedly have enough money in the first place?
Prime Minister!
Right honourable gentlemen, as I've said here before, and I've just quoted, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools. We've also put in place,
I suppose that's the way it is, man. I don't know.
Distribution of the funding between our schools. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But what is important in our education system is not just about what government puts in, it's about what quality of education is received by the children. There are more children in good and outstanding schools. The disadvantage attainment gap has been narrowed, and record rates of disadvantaged young people are going to university. That's a record to be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the Prime Minister had a chance to listen to or read the words of the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. He said, and I quote, "The fact that so many schools are doing this should be ringing serious alarm bells for the government." The Prime Minister doesn't seem to be aware of the crisis that's facing so many in education at the present time. So can she be very clear with the House? Has per pupil funding risen or fallen since 2010?
Prime Minister!
Right honourable gentlemen, we're giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But why are we able to do that? It's because the Conservatives have taken a balanced approach to our economy and managed our finances well. What would Labour give us? 1,000 billion extra pounds in borrowing. That would mean higher taxes, fewer jobs, and less money to go into our schools.
It's out in two ways, Mr. Speaker. One is a Labour government would properly fund our schools. It wouldn't shortchange our children. And we wouldn't use Orwellian words like fair funding while we're cutting. Per pupil funding, Mr. Speaker, just so the Prime Minister understands it, has fallen by 8%. For sixth forms, it's 24%. At the end of last year, the Prime Minister said, austerity is over. Maria, who describes herself as a teacher in an
No, I'm just thinking of
underfunded
other things in my
school,
brain
wrote to
while I'm
me
filming this.
week. And she asked this.
Thinking about Parliament.
Maria is a teacher in an underfunded school. I think you need to listen to her. When will the government stop making false claims of increased funding for schools and start to tackle the serious problems faced by teachers? When will the cuts end for our children's schools?
Prime Minister!
I repeat what I said. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But let's just see the situation that this government inherited and that we would see under a Labour government in the future. Having to spend more on debt interest than on our schools budget. That's not because of what this government is doing, because we're bringing debt down. It's the legacy left by a Labour government. More money on debt than on our schools.
What this government has squandered is what it inherited. Children's centres, Sure Start, children taken out of poverty. It's squandered the future for so many of our children.
Order, Mr. Burkhardt. You're an educated young man. When you came into the house, you struck me as a very well-behaved fellow. Calm yourself and listen. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education's funding chief met with school leaders recently, and he told them the first thing to say is obviously they're not generous budgets. He's very, very cautious with his words. They are budgets which leave schools with real pressures to face. Everyone agrees, Mr. Speaker, that our creative industries in this country are an enormous strength to our economy. So why then have the arts borne the brunt of the government's brutal cuts to school funding? So many children losing out on music and creative art in our schools because of decisions made by central government.
Prime Minister!
Say to the right honourable gentleman, he started his question by claiming that this government had squandered what had been left by the last Labour government. Let's just look at what was left by the last Labour government. What? Oh, they don't want to be reminded what they left in the last time they were in government. What did the last Labour government leave? Unemployment higher than when it went into office. What did the last Labour government leave? The biggest deficit in our peacetime history. And what were we told by the departing Chief Secretary to the Treasury? Under Labour, there is no money left.
My question, Mr. Speaker, was actually about funding for arts and creative subjects in schools. A survey has shown that 9 out of 10 secondary schools have cut back on lesson time, staff or facilities in at least one of the creative arts subjects. Are the artists and actors of tomorrow only to come from the private schools while she continues to cut the funding for state schools? When the Prime Minister says that school funding has been protected, she's denying, Mr. Speaker, the daily experience of teachers, parents and pupils. She's denying the incontrovertible evidence of the IFS, education bodies and teaching unions. She is actually in outright denial. And when the wealth of the richest 1,000 people has increased by £50 billion in the last year alone, don't tell us the money isn't there for our children's schools. This government has cut vital public services to give tax cuts to the privileged few. Can the Prime Minister name a more damaging policy, a more short-sighted policy than cutting investment in our future, our children?
Say to the right honourable gentleman, the richest have paid more tax every year under the Conservatives. Oh, wait for it. They have paid more under every year under the Conservatives than in any year under a Labour government. And he talks about what happens in our schools. As I said, we are putting record funding into our schools. But what matters is the quality of education that our children get. Labour oppose the phonics checks. They want to scrap academies and free schools. They'd abolish SATs. That doesn't help to raise the standards in our schools. But let's just look at the Labour record. When they were in government, standards were lower than they are today. Where they are in government in Wales, standards are lower than in England. And if they were to get into government, we would see more of the same. Lower standards, less opportunity for young people for a brighter future under Labour. It's the Conservative Party that give good quality of education, good jobs and a good future.
Mr. Ronald J. Wardener.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend explain why she ordered that the consultation on the Troubles in Northern Ireland should not contain proposals for a statute of limitations, as was reported in the Sunday Telegraph? And can she update us on what the government will actually get on and do?
Prime Minister.
First of all, he shouldn't necessarily believe all the reports he reads in the newspapers, but let me be very clear on this particular issue. Around 3,500 people were killed in the Troubles. The vast majority were murdered by terrorists. The legal position is clear. Any amnesty or statute of limitations would have to apply across the board. It would apply to terrorists. I am not prepared to accept a proposal which brings in amnesties for terrorists.
Ian Blackford.
I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister of the heinous crimes that took place 2 years ago in Manchester. We all must stand together against terrorism. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's customs tariff plan has been described by the UK's former representative to the EU as the definition of insanity. Her customs union compromise already dismissed by the European Union. Isn't this new deal just a fantasy?
Prime Minister.
Right, honourable gentlemen, I've set out the 10 points about the New Deal. There is an issue about customs. There is a difference of opinion in this House on the future customs arrangement with the European Union. That's why it's important that this House actually comes to a decision on that issue. Allowing the second reading of the withdrawal agreement bill will enable this House to come to a decision on that issue. It will also enable the House to come to a decision on a second referendum, which I continue to believe would not be the right route for this country to go down. We should deliver on the first referendum before suggesting anything about a second.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, talk about ignoring reality. Prime Minister, look at the benches behind you. The Prime Minister is fooling no one but herself. And the truth, Mr. Speaker, is that the people of Scotland don't want her deal. Her own party doesn't want her deal. And now even the pro-Brexit Labour front bench won't support her deal. Her time is up. Tomorrow, people in Scotland have a choice. To send a message, to send pro-European, outward-looking Scottish National Party NUP MPs to Brussels to stop Brexit. Prime Minister, what party does she think the people of Scotland will choose?
Prime Minister.
There is only one party in Scotland guaranteeing no more referendums, and that's the Conservative Party.
James Eby.
Thank you, sir.
Colleagues, calm yourselves. Dignity, restraint. Let's hear Mr. Heapy.
Thank you, sir. My constituent, Jackie Luxon, was 26 weeks pregnant at the time of a car crash that caused her baby to be stillborn. However, only the injuries caused to Mrs. Luxon and their older daughter were relevant when charging and subsequently sentencing the driver whose dangerous driving caused the crash. The baby, Grace, got no justice at all. And I understand from the police and stillbirth support groups that the Luxon's tragic experience is sadly far from unique. Will the Prime Minister look again at the 1988 Road Traffic Act so that those who cause death to viable babies over 24 weeks gestation through dangerous driving can be held responsible for these tragic losses of life?
Prime Minister.
I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I know that all members from across the House, and it would have been obvious in the response to his question, will want to join me in sending deepest sympathies to my honourable friend's constituent. As my honourable friend will know, the courts can already and do consider harm caused to a mother or unborn child in sentencing for an offence. And I know my honourable friend has discussed changing the law on this particular issue with the Ministry of Justice. They are concerned that there could be far-reaching unintended consequences of doing so, but I have asked them to keep the law under review. I know that my honourable friend, along with others in this House, will be continuing to work on this issue. I'm sure everybody recognises the compassion that my honourable friend is showing in raising this issue. What we want to ensure is that what he is proposing is not something that could lead to other unintended consequences of the sort that he would not wish to see.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, it's been brought to my attention that some children suffering from severe epilepsy have been able to greatly reduce and in some cases end their seizures if they've got access to Bedrolite. Due to the cumbersome and discriminating system this government implemented on the 1st of November 2018, parents are required to travel abroad, pay thousands of pounds and break the law to bring medicine back, or pay extraordinary prices to access Bedrolite privately in the UK. Rather than people having to fight for access on a case-by-case basis, will the Prime Minister apply some common sense and show a soupçon of compassion and do everything she can to make medical cannabis available to many people that are suffering and ensure that those who can benefit do?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that these are, I fully understand, these cases are desperately difficult and my sympathies are with the families and friends. The government did change the law, as he said, and specialist doctors on the General Medical Council Specialist Register can now prescribe cannabis-based products for medicinal use where there is clinical evidence of benefit. NHS England and the Chief Medical Officer have made it clear that cannabis-based products can be prescribed for medicinal use in appropriate cases. But we must trust doctors to make clinical decisions in the best interests of patients.
Give it on in, Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When Sally Masterton discovered a £1 billion fraud at Lloyds, the bank sought to discredit her to the regulator, constructively dismissed her, and prevented her working with the police investigation, who had described her role as vital. 5 years later, the bank apologised and paid an undisclosed amount of compensation, yet the FCA continued to refuse to investigate. Would the Prime Minister use her powers to compel them to do so and sanction those responsible, including, if relevant, the Chief Executive for those 5 years, Antonio Horta Osorio?
I say to my honourable friend, I think obviously it's important to remember that the events at HBOS Reading branch constituted criminal activity, and it's right that those responsible were brought to justice. The FCA are currently conducting 2 investigations into the events at HBOS Reading, including the bank's communications with regulators following the discovery of the misconduct. And Lloyds have appointed a former High Court judge, Dame Linda Dobbs, to consider whether issues related to HBOS Reading were properly investigated and reported by Lloyds Banking Group. Those findings will be shared with the FCA, and I look forward to the conclusion of all those investigations.
David Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, Brampton Primary School in Chesterfield has an exemplary record in special needs education. Yet under the government's funding formula, the first £6,000 of every special needs child isn't actually funded by the government, when even the Tory lead member for education in Derbyshire describes a school like Brampton as a victim of their own success. Isn't it time that the Prime Minister, in her final days, changed the funding formula and started looking after those special needs children?
I say to the honourable gentleman, we have been putting more money into special educational needs. I recognise that for many parents, getting the support that is required for their children can be a difficult process with the local authorities. We recognise the importance of special needs, and that is precisely why we have been putting extra support in there.
Mr. Alston-Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I thank the Prime Minister for the amount of British aid which flows through to the World Food Programme in Yemen, and ask if she's noted in the last 48 hours a report by its excellent director David Beasley drawing attention to the diversion of aid and the theft of aid in Houthi-controlled areas by Houthi authorities. Would she urge the international community to increase the pressure on Houthi leadership to resolve this and further the efforts for peace in Yemen, rather than take the slightly easy course of always focusing on the Yemeni government and the Saudi-led coalition.
My right honourable friend raises a very important point. We are all concerned about the humanitarian situation in the Yemen. As he rightly says, this government has a good record in terms of the amount of money that we are providing, the aid that we are providing to help those in the Yemen. But of course, it is only of benefit if it is able to reach those who need it. And it is incumbent on all parties to ensure that that aid reaches those who need it. We will continue to support the efforts to bring a lasting peace to the Yemen. A political settlement there is the way to get that sustainability and security for the future. But it's incumbent on everybody to make sure that the aid that is being provided for those who are desperately in need is able to reach those who need it most.
Stephen Morgan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 5th of June, the eyes of the world will be on Portsmouth for D-Day 75. Events planned will give justice to the sacrifices made by veterans, like my own grandfather, and will show Portsmouth to be a place that fosters a legacy of remembrance, reflection, and reconciliation. Our allies in World War II, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US, have all taken the steps to ensure coroners record suicide amongst the veteran community. Prime Minister, why don't we?
Prime Minister!
Can I say, first of all, to the honourable gentleman that it is indeed right that the eyes of the world will be on Portsmouth for the D-Day National Commemorative event. This will be putting our veterans first. It remembers their sacrifices and their achievements, and we will highlight the historic strength of the Western Alliance and the transatlantic partnership. He's raised a specific issue in relation to the coroner's reports, and I will write to him in response to that. But can I say that I look forward, as do others, to being in Portsmouth to commemorate this very important anniversary.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, 43 years ago, I, like many others, was ordered to serve in Northern Ireland to keep the peace by terrorists attacking and killing civilians in Northern Ireland. Many of my colleagues and others did not come back, including one, Robert Myrak, a friend, who was tortured, murdered, and whose body has never been found, nor his murderers ever been brought to justice. I simply say to my right honourable friend that in answer to our honourable friend earlier question, she talked about an amnesty. I must tell her that none of those who served have called for an amnesty. What they have called for is fairness and justice. Many, many old veterans now are finding, having been cleared decades ago, that the PSNI is now proceeding against them with no new evidence. Can I please ask her, will she answer me, how is it that I can say to my old colleagues that this government has not abandoned them?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend, we absolutely value the service that he and others did in Northern Ireland. This was a very difficult time for a part of the United Kingdom, and the work that the police did and that the armed forces did in Northern Ireland during that time was absolutely crucial. We are pleased that we've seen the peace that has come since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, but there was obviously much injury and loss of life during the Troubles. As I indicated earlier, around 3,500 people were killed during the Troubles. The vast majority of those were murdered by terrorists. My right honourable friend talks about a fair and just system. We want to ensure that there is a fair and just system that is working across the board to deal with these legacy issues. But what is happening at the moment is that there is a disproportionate emphasis in terms of cases that involve the police and the armed forces. There are cases involving terrorists that are being looked into, but I think people would recognise that there is a disproportionate emphasis on the police and armed forces. What is important is that we therefore bring in a system which has full support and which will enable people to see that fairness and justice being applied. That is what the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is working on. She has been working on that with the various political parties in Northern Ireland, and it is what we will, in due course, put forward. We recognise the sacrifice and the bravery and determination of our armed forces and the work they did in Northern Ireland, and we too want to see fairness and justice.
It took time to get there, but the Prime Minister has now recognised that a no-deal Brexit is not a viable option. But she knows, as well as the rest of us, that many of her potential successors do not feel the same way. So can she tell us whether she agrees with her Brexit secretary, amongst others, who thinks that we should be spending the coming months stepping up preparations for a no-deal Brexit, or with her chancellor, who has issued an edict that no more Treasury money should be spent on preparing for a no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister.
As the Honourable Lady knows, there is only one way of this House ensuring that we leave the European Union without no deal, and that is to leave with a deal, and that is to support the second reading of the withdrawal agreement bill and take that process through this House. But the Honourable Lady, I'm sure, also knows that the legal default position continues to be no deal. Were we to get to the 31st of October situation, I want us to leave the EU before then. But were we to get to the 31st of October position, it will be a matter for the 27, not just for this country, to determine whether there was no deal or not. And that is why it is absolutely right that the government is continuing to make preparations for no deal.
Charles Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like so many people in this chamber, I want to see more monies for schools, hospitals, the police and transport. Is not the best way of doing this to agree a deal that allows us to legally exit the EU, thereby unlocking 3 years of pent-up investment, sitting on the sidelines, seeking certainty that the Prime Minister is trying to deliver, and this party should be trying to deliver.
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. There is pent-up investment there. There are companies who've been holding investment back until they see the Brexit deal being resolved. And it is important that we do see that deal going through this House. Supporting the withdrawal agreement bill is the way to ensure that we deliver the Brexit that the people voted for, and we do it in a way that Conservatives stood on in their manifesto at the last election, and actually that the Labour Party members stood on in their manifesto at the last election. Once we are over this, once we have left the European Union, then we will be able to take advantage not only of the deal dividend, but of that increased investment and see that bright future for our country.
Jeff Smith.
Mr. Speaker, as a Manchester MP, can I thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for their words of remembrance for the victims of the terrorist attack in our city 2 years ago. In the light of concerns expressed about delays in accessing compensation and the amounts offered to victims following the attack, will the government give consideration, when the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme is reviewed this year, to establishing a separate government funding pot for victims of terrorist attacks, so it doesn't have to be taken from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority funding, and so we can give more flexible and immediate support to victims of terror attacks?
Prime Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman has raised a very important point, and I recognise the force with which he's raised that and the concern he has for those who were the victims of that terrible attack. And of course, sadly, in this country, we have seen too many people being victims of terrorist attacks. The Lord Chancellor has indicated that the Ministry of Justice is reviewing this situation. He has heard the specific proposal that the honourable gentleman has put forward, and I'm sure we'll take that into account in that review.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Returning to Northern Ireland, it's now 2.5 years that there's been no devolved government in Northern Ireland, and every week on the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, we hear about the impact of this on ordinary people, whether it's on quality issues, whether it's funding for the PSNI, whether it's a pay rise for teachers who are paid 6% less than there are teachers in the rest of the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is being left behind. Will the Prime Minister do all she can to restore devolution before the end of the year?
Prime Minister.
I give my honourable friend that reassurance. I am as keen as she is to ensure that we see the restoration of devolution in Northern Ireland. I believe that recently all the parties have come together with talks with the Secretary of State and as appropriate, the Irish government, and are ensuring that those talks are continuing. Obviously, there are issues that need to be addressed, concerns from the political parties on different issues. Those need to be overcome such that we can see devolution restored, because as my honourable friend says, this is a matter for the people of Northern Ireland, and to ensure they have a devolved government that can ensure that good governance in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On 2 previous occasions, I've asked the Prime Minister to do more to support the victims of the leasehold scandal. Now that she's about to move house anytime soon, will the PM give that a little more focus and urgently address this issue and give leaseholders justice?
Prime Minister.
honourable gentlemen, we have been listening to those who've raised concerns about this particular issue. Last year, of course, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, announced no new government funding scheme will be used to support the unjustified use of leasehold.
It's a long video, this, guys.
We have had a technical consultation on how to improve the market for consumers. We're analysing the
people that are watching it.
We'll respond to that and the recent Select Committee report on leasehold reform shortly, and we will introduce legislation in due course.
Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, in reply to my right honourable
As you guys are watching the video, I'm filming it as well on the phone. So we're both watching at the same time.
Who, through their courage, professionalism and skill, maintain the rule of law, without which the Belfast Agreement would never have been signed. Correct. But she didn't quite answer his...
No, it's gone now. Unless this is part 2, I'll check it now.
I think where we are is that the original...
I think that one's finished, actually.
Theresa May and the backbench was the 1922 Executive Committee Chairman, Graham Brady, was that in 2.5 weeks' time, there would be the second reading of this new, improved deal that she wanted to put before Parliament, and then afterwards, it wasn't specified which day, she would meet him and give a timetable for leaving. I think the effect of today is that, in fact, she's going to be meeting him on Friday, this Friday, the day after the European Parliament elections, and he's going to be expecting to agree a timetable for her leaving then.
Crazy world we live in, eh?
That means that we are not going to get probably to the second reading of the bill. Her announcement to stand down could come on Friday, could come next week, could come just the week after, maybe a week on Tuesday, when Parliament is back after a break, when the state visit from President Trump is underway. All the dates are awkward, everything is awkward, but she will try and agree something which is sooner than people had originally thought. The crisis that has absolutely triggered this is Theresa May making that speech yesterday about the new improved deal, and as far as some cabinet ministers were concerned, going beyond what they felt they had agreed in cabinet. They were trying to push her back. She was trying to reach out to Labour MPs. They were trying to push her back from that. They feel she went too far in not just saying that a second referendum vote would happen in the House of Commons. That would be bad enough, but that the government would, if it passed, facilitate a second referendum. That was just toxic to them, toxic to those people in the cabinet, particularly perhaps, who were thinking of running for the leadership. There's no way they could vote, they felt, for that, because that would antagonise the Tory party membership. So the question for them was, what do? You need to stop it. Do you try to depose her? I think there were serious discussions in the campaigns around leadership contenders today about how you mustn't do that because you don't want your DNA on the murder victim if you actually got rid of the Prime Minister. And so what they decided to do was they should push them out the door, get them to go and tell the Prime Minister to her face that they couldn't support the bill as currently written.
This is my Game Cave hat. That's the telephone number of Game Cave, where I go for my games. That's the telephone number you can ring on to the game shop. It's in a place called, if you guys have ever been to Telford before, this is where I ordered this hat from. I bought this hat from there. And a lot of people have seen this. So if you want to buy any games from the game shop, Open Gates, there's a number for the game shop. I'm sure they like to give them a call and buy games off them, buy pop vinyls, DVDs. Yeah, and apart from that, let's watch this rest of this Brexit thing.
So what we're looking at, if you remember all those sort of logic trees we've been looking at throughout this entire crisis, a giant branch breaks off with Theresa May going when she goes, because the idea of leaving with a deal looks much more remote, and the idea of leaving with no deal, the second referendum, or revoking Brexit altogether, or a general election, those things look more likely. Talking of elections, of course, this is the eve, as you said, of the European elections, when normally you're focused on getting the vote out. The Tory party today focused on getting the Prime Minister out.
This is a great time to be alive, a great future.
What a difference a day makes. If Theresa May thought the new Brexit deal she proclaimed yesterday stood a chance, her own ministers and backbenchers today put her right.
She's flogging a completely dead horse by introducing this bill. I think that she should abandon that. And I'm afraid to say that beyond that, I think she has to recognise that I think she has personally come to the end of the road. support for her within the party is dissipating to the extent of being almost non-existent.
At the end of the day, our system has a self-cleaning mechanism which will go on, and that's how it works, I'm afraid, in both parties, in all parties. Their leaders are only there as long as they have the support of their colleagues, and that support, it appears, has been ebbing away.
What will you be talking to the Prime Minister about? That will be a matter for me and the Prime Minister. Will you be asking for her to step down? I'm not discussing what I would say to the Prime Minister in a private discussion.
The Scottish Secretary was one of a handful of cabinet ministers who asked to meet the Prime Minister this afternoon. And the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, David Mundell, was concerned she'd offered Labour MPs more on a second referendum on Brexit than had been agreed at yesterday's cabinet.
Morning, do you fully support the Prime Minister's new deal?
Well, I'm looking very carefully at the legislation today as Leader of the Commons. That's my job, and making sure that it delivers Brexit.
You don't often hear a cabinet minister clearly saying she was marking the Prime Minister's homework. Some cabinet ministers told the Chief Whip that they could not support the withdrawal bill, as described by the Prime Minister in her speech. They never got the one-on-one meetings some wanted with Theresa May herself.
Will you still be Prime Minister in a week, Mrs May?
She came to the Commons at midday to sell a deal she already knew was badly bold.
In the end, our job in this House is to take decisions, not to duck them. So I will put those decisions to this House, because that is my duty, and because it is the only way that we can deliver Brexit.
The Prime Minister couldn't even get the compromise deal she wanted through her own cabinet. And it's clear that the shrunken offer that emerged satisfied no one.
Many Tory MPs didn't bother to turn up for what would normally be a packed event.
The benches opposite concentrate on ways to mount a leadership coup, and where are they? That's exactly what they're doing this afternoon, because they're not here to support the Prime Minister.
Some were talking tactics with their preferred candidates for the succession. Some Tory MPs were trying to get the 1922 executive, which sets the leadership rules, to force the Prime Minister out of office immediately.
It's falling away now, so it's difficult to see how she can manage to change tack and to garner support again, and that's the real issue. So, the 22 committee will almost certainly have to make some decision, literally now.
It leaves a few Brexiteers queasy about what will follow the end of Theresa May's premiership and her deal.
If she goes without Brexit being resolved, we are facing a catastrophic general election, and perhaps we're facing a second referendum, the whole thing being stopped, the Labour government. You see my point?
And this is the Brexit debate.
All this on the eve of the European Parliament elections. Who would have expected this introduction in an online debate to these two faces?
Today I'm joined by the two people heading up the parties at the top of the latest opinion polls. Sir Vincent Cable.
Order! Order!
Parliament rose early again. Just before 4:30, Brexit legislation piled up at the door for want of votes to pass it.
Well, joining me now is Theresa Villiers, former Northern Ireland Secretary, and Steve Baker, who's Deputy Chair of the ERG group of Conservative Brexiteers. Theresa Villiers first. You have not called for Theresa May's resignation today. Is it now time for her to go?
Well, I can understand why she would want to step down on the eve of a major national election, but I think in the coming days we do need to have a timetable for the Prime Minister to stand down. I'm afraid we've really reached the end of the road. We need fresh leadership in the Conservative Party.
By Friday, basically, she's got to be going.
I certainly believe that that would be an important step forward for the Conservatives and for getting the government back on track to ensure we actually deliver the Brexit the people voted for.
So you've pushed her out. Are you content?
Well, this is a horrible situation. It's a question of being content. After I resigned, along with Boris and David Davis, we said this was not about the policy. This was not about the person. It's about the policy. And I'm afraid now it is about the policy and the person. The two are intertwined, and the Prime Minister has really run out of road. Now we've rejected the deal 3 times. I'm confident it would have been rejected a 4th. So it's not a question of contentment. This is an awful period for everybody.
But she said in the Commons today, MPs have a duty to, quote, take decisions, not to duck them. I mean, you're pushing her to the limit. It's an impossible position to be in to try and lead her fractious party through this mess. Really,
There's absolutely no doubt that this was always going to be a difficult lead for any Prime Minister. But Theresa May decided to take this on. But I have a long history of intimate acquaintance with events, which I've put on the record and people will find elsewhere if they Google it. I've set out what happened. But back in March 18, next-year Brexit ministers took a decision to go for an FTA-based Brexit. And a few weeks later, EU, a free trade agreement-based Brexit, a few weeks later, the EU offered us that kind of exit.
Probably haven't got time for the
I was
history now, but
rejoicing.
bring us up to date.
I was rejoicing,
You've
but
got
that
a duty
wasn't.
to get through
But
this
that
as
wasn't
well.
good enough for the Prime Minister.
No.
And that is the ultimate source of all these difficulties. She tried to keep us much more highly aligned to the EU. It was never going to work, and that's why we're where we are. It's why we tried to remove the Prime Minister before Christmas.
Okay, she's had an impossible task there, hasn't she? To try and keep the party on board and to negotiate a Brexit. Many believe is an impossible task.
Well, it was always going to be incredibly difficult. We're a divided country and a divided parliament. But what the Prime Minister hasn't done is to seriously ask the EU for that kind of style trade agreement that Steve was just talking about, which Donald Tusk offered, and also her government has acknowledged that the alternative arrangements put forward under the so-called North-House Compromise of the Northern Ireland border are workable, and yet she hasn't pressed them in Brussels. That's what we need a new Prime Minister to do, to take seriously that work and negotiate with the EU to get the backstop out, but to still ensure that we have an invisible and compliant border on the island of Ireland.
Can Boris Johnson do any better? I mean, a lot of people in Europe refuse to even speak to him.
But you've got, I mean, for example, Michel Barnier himself has acknowledged that the kind of checks away from the border is something that is feasible in practice. It happens today in Rotterdam. You know, the proposals I and others have put forward are actually based on existing technology, on existing legal flexibilities in operation on borders in other parts of the world. It is not an impossible conundrum to solve.
But can Boris solve it? Does he have your vote tonight?
I haven't decided who I will back in the
Keeping your powder dry
when it comes.
The next Prime Minister needs to be somebody who believes in what we're doing, who knows what to do, why we're doing it, how to get it done, who to bring in to provide the expertise. Now, it's by no means settled who that will be, but it is clear that in the polls of members, Boris is in the lead. But, you know, Dominic Raab's a very talented, he's a very talented man as well. But I do think that the next leader needs to be someone who really believes in what we're doing.
You're all hedging your bets. Well, thank you very much for joining us both. I think we can now be joined by Nicky Morgan. Yes, I can see her lurking here. So you have long supported Theresa May, and you've sort of kept her deal going. Where are you now tonight?
Well, look, I said in the Commons today, if the bill were to come before the House in June, I would vote for it. But actually, I think that if the bill were to come to us and then to be defeated, the consequences of that, we end up either with a no-deal Brexit or a revocation of Article 50 facing us, are so serious. I hope she won't put the bill before the House. And I think that it's now time, very sadly, to start the leadership process, to give that opportunity to somebody else to potentially put another deal together that can command a majority in the House of Commons.
Who is that somebody else?
Well, I'm not going to indulge in personalities, and I've just heard what Theresa and what Steve was saying and everything else. I mean, at the moment, I think we've got the initial issue, obviously, is talking to Theresa May about her leadership, thinking about the right thing to do with the bill and with Brexit. Then there'll be people who put themselves forward.
Will you put yourself forward?
No, I'm not going to put myself forward. I don't think I'm the right person. Yeah, I have ruled it out.
Does it have to be a Brexiteer, though? Because we've had a Remainer in there.
Well,
they
it's
haven't
interesting.
managed it.
I think there was an element of, I don't think it has to be somebody who has always been a Brexiteer, but I think it's got to be somebody who does accept, I'm reconciled to the result. There are other people who are more enthusiastic who didn't vote for it. I think it's someone like that who says, here's the opportunity, but this is how I'm going to take both the 52 and the 48 to a deal.
Could you back Boris?
I don't think Boris is going to be my preferred candidate.
Very
I love the fact that
diplomatic.
he is appealing to one nation conservatism, which is something I've been championing for many, many months. Let's see who stands.
Very briefly, can the Conservatives survive this? The predictions are they're going to go down to the worst ever result at a national ballot tomorrow.
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, the European elections, we've had some pretty bad results in the past for the Conservative Party. And, it will be very interesting to see what the result is and all the rest of it. But this is not a general election. Yes, the Conservative Party can survive. But I've been saying for months, the Conservative Party can survive if Conservative MPs and party members decide they want to survive. I think most of us do. We need a centre-right party in the UK political system. This is going to be a very difficult couple of weeks.
No God-given right to survive.
No. Of course not. No party has that. But I do think, as I say, we always need a centre-right voice in British politics. Let's see what happens.
Nikki Morgan, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's all from here for now. Let's go now to Jackie in Downing Street.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Welcome back to Downing Street. In the last few minutes, the Chief Whip, Julian Smith, has arrived at number 10, and we understand that the Prime Minister has arrived at the back gate, coming back from her planned regular meeting with the Queen. So outside of all the wranglings over the Tory party leadership, they also have an election to worry about. Tomorrow, around 400 million people across Europe will go to the ballot box to elect MEPs to the European Parliament. It's the election the UK never thought it would be part of, but here we are. And leading the polls is Nigel Farage's Brexit party, with the traditional major parties trailing by a distance. Joining me now from a studio in central London is the chairman of the Brexit party, Richard Tice. He's also standing as a candidate in the east of England. Mr. Tice, thanks very much for joining us today. Is your party's greatest weapon the incompetence of all the others?
Well, I think that's partly our success, but also the truth is that voters, they voted for Brexit. We were told over 100 times by this Prime Minister we were going to leave on March the 29th. We're not. People have lost trust in democracy, and people, I think, are going to clearly vote tomorrow. We hope that we will win, and we will win big. We want people to vote clearly, to send a big message back to Westminster. Actually, what people want is a clear, clean WTO Brexit, so that we can all get on with our lives and we can maximise the opportunities of Brexit.
You know that this push for no deal, the Chancellor, endless economists, business people, politicians on all sides of the House say it will be disastrous. It will make people poorer, and people did not vote to become poorer.
It's interesting, isn't it? We had all these threats and scaremongering before the referendum, and the voters ignored it. And we believe that the voters will ignore these threats yet again because they've all been proven to be completely wrong. And who do we trust? If you believe in democracy, then actually you trust the people. And the truth is, if we have a WTO Brexit, then the jobs that are now being put at risk just today with British Steel in the north of England, tens of thousands of jobs, then actually the government would have been able to save that company, and that would have removed all of this uncertainty. This is really important because at the moment the government cannot save British Steel because it cannot provide state aid to that company. When we leave the European Union, and if we'd left on the 29th, then the government could have stepped in.
A WTO Brexit pulls the UK out of one of the most advanced trade agreements in history. Which country trades on WTO rules do you think the UK should aspire to? What's the role model?
Over 160 other countries around the world, but not members of the European Union, trade under the umbrella of WTO rules, and they have the freedom to do deals with other countries around the world. And we have a huge opportunity with countries like America, with our Commonwealth partners, to do quick, fast, sensible, smart trade deals. That's the opportunity, and that's where the growth, where the future growth is. It's interesting, isn't it? The European Union's
name one country. Sorry, the question was to name one country that you think is a role model for the future under WTO Brexit.
Well, I've just said that over 160 other countries in the world operate under the umbrella of WTO rules. We, as the 5th largest economy in the world, have the opportunity to be in control of our economy, to decide when companies of strategic national interest, like British Steel, should be saved in our national interest. And at the moment, sadly, we're not able to do that because we didn't leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
British Steel has said the threat of Brexit, the uncertainty over Brexit, has in part led to this decision today.
The truth is the opposite. The truth is they had to pay £120 million in payments to the European Union because we hadn't left on March the 29th to do with some of the emission trading schemes. If we'd left on March the 29th, they wouldn't have had to make those payments, and the government could have stepped in and saved that company, which is of a strategic national interest. It's worth noting, over 90% of the rails, the tracks that are used by Network Rail are made by British Steel. That is all under threat.
You talked earlier about trust. You are promising as a party to dismantle the old discredited politics, the old elites that you keep talking about. Nigel Farage has been living a pretty elite life, funded by Aaron Banks. First he denied it, then under pressure he admitted it. That's pretty much old, discredited, ugly politics, isn't it?
I tell you what it is, it's old news. You're talking about events that took place between 2 and 3 years ago. What we're now talking about is the Brexit Party and my role as chairman. We're just 6 weeks old.
Trust. You talk about trust in politicians.
I tell you what,
it's important about trust, isn't
let the voters tomorrow tell us all who they trust. and we're leading in the polls, we think voters will give us that trust because they know that the quality of our candidates and the simple, clear message that we offer.
You have no manifesto. You have no policy apart from no deal. Don't the voters deserve more than that? What else can you offer them? What else can you tell them about what you're offering them?
You talk about trust. We trust the voters. The Westminster establishment may not. We trust the voters, and we believe that they're going to vote for us significantly tomorrow, and that we will win, and that we have the opportunity to win big. And do you know what? We could well be the largest single party in the whole of the European Parliament from a standing start just 6 weeks ago. That is the definition, in my view, of trust in new, competent,
and you can tell
people.
Any voters concerned about it that Arron Banks is no longer funding Nigel Farage's lifestyle.
I can tell you that Arron Banks is not involved in the Brexit Party whatsoever. We're funded at the grassroots level by over 100,000 supporters who've joined in the last 6 weeks, paying a registered supporter fee of at least £25.
So
that is trust. That is the most.
You can assure people of that.
Look, you keep harking back. Do you know what voters are doing? Voters are looking forwards. They're looking forward to a new party they can trust with competent, capable people talking about competent leadership as the country is taken forward and
they can trust you even though you won't answer that question.
I think, well, we'll see what they trust tomorrow, won't we? I'm very happy to answer questions about the Brexit Party, about me, my role as chairman, and that's what voters are interested in. They're not interested in Arron Banks and who funded what 2 or 3 years ago. You're looking backwards, the country is looking forwards.
Richard Tice, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, guys, I've hoped you all enjoyed that long video of Brexit, and you'll see the Conservatives and Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May kicking up on there. A bit of Nigel Farage is in the video, talking about a bit of Northern Ireland, the Troubles is in the video as well. So, and Anna Shrewsbury, thank you for joining me, and hope you all enjoyed the video when you watch it, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining me. Peace. And I will do another one like this eventually. I'll probably do some other streams as well. All right, guys. See you next one. Peace.